Okay, over to you, Mr. Chairman. We are now live.
Thank you, Neil. Good evening all and welcome to a virtual meeting of the Residents' Education and Environmental Services Policy Overview Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Bridges and I am the chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. For those present during the meeting and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. So we'll go on to some online housekeeping rules. Please ensure your mobile phones are switched on silent or switched off. If wearing a headset, ensure the microphone is away from your mouth to avoid noise. Please keep the microphone muted when not speaking and then unmute to speak. And only one person may speak at a time and I as chairman will call those to speak. And before we go on to our agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of the councillors present to confirm their attendance. Please indicate you are present when I say your name. Councillor Morgan, the Vice Chairman.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vardia.
Oh, yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Hello, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Good evening. Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Good evening, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez.
Good evening, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Good evening. Councillor Sullivan.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Good evening. Our opposition lead, Councillor Sweeting.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Mavis.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm present.
Good evening. And our co-opted member, Mr. Tony Little. Mr. Little. I can see you're here, so I'll take you as presence.
I think you muted and unmuted and then muted yourself again.
Sorry, the mute reaction is function is intermittent. Anyway, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Also, please can the officers present indicate they are in this meeting as well. Debbie Scarborough, Adult and Community Learning Service Manager.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Good evening. School Place Planning Project Manager Sarah Phillips.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Our Director for Housing, Environment, Education, Performance, Health and Wellbeing, Dan Kennedy.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Green Space Service Manager Stuart Hunt.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Our Education Manager Ronnie Dardy.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Good evening. Head of Education Improvement and Partnerships, Abby Preston.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Head of Business and Performance and Insights, Naveed Mohammed.
Good evening, Chair. Present.
Good evening. And our Democratic Services Officer, Neil Fraser.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'm also delighted to welcome our external witnesses this evening. If you could also please indicate you're present. The Head of Adult Learning and Skills Service for the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, Eamon Scanlon.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Good evening. Welcome. And the Ealing Adult Learning Manager, Christy Gonzalez. Welcome to you as well.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Good evening and welcome to you as well. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, example, a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate. Quorum is 5 councillors. Importantly, any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time will not be able to vote on that item they were not present on. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available on the YouTube underneath the broadcast. Before we go on to apologies for absence, as members will note, there is a very heavy agenda this evening, and to ensure full member participation and opportunity to ask questions, I would suggest to officers that, taking into consideration the members have read the reports, that they keep their presentations brief and summarise what is in the report rather than going through it page by page. That will allow the maximum time for councillors to ask questions. We move on to apologies for absence, please.
All members are present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see no indications. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1, which brings us on to item 4, pages 1 to 6, to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any people wishing to speak? Neil Fraser.
Yeah, just before we get on to that, Chairman, just as a follow-up to some of the actions resulting from the previous meeting, I do have some answers for some of the questions that were raised. So on the matter of the canals and towpaths item, officers have informed me that the 150 metre threshold is indeed a national direction and is not locally set. Regarding whose responsibility it is to manage the upkeep and the upkeep of the towpaths, it is the Canal and River Trust responsibility to maintain and clear the towpath. The trust has a contractor who can collect litter and manages vegetation along the towpath called fountains. The CRT also organised towpath adoptions with local community groups and businesses, where they help collect litter and keep an eye on the stretch of towpath, which can help improve it between the fountains visits. In addition, there was a question regarding the Cabinet Forward Plan and why some policy review committees are listed as consultees and some are not. That is because the POCs are not consultees on every Cabinet report. Only where we know they're part of the consultation would they be listed. In specific reference to the Climate Change Action Plan, the Climate Emergency Declaration approved by full council stated that the Corporate Services POC would lead on monitoring the Cabinet's action plan. As the Climate Change Action Plan is coming to Cabinet in the future weeks for consultation, the Corporate POC will be part of this afterwards. It is then up to other POCs to determine whether they wish to be part of any consultation on the Climate Change Action Plan, although the Corporate POC will lead on this and it is present on their work programme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Neil. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have a question. It related to the 150 metre threshold, but Neil, as you just heard, Neil's answered that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members wishing to ask questions or provide any comments? Councillor Mavis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in response to what Neil said in terms of the Cabinet Forward Plan and the Climate Change Action Plan, it would be useful to find out why that decision was made that they would be the lead committee when environment is a significant part of our remit. And I would just ask, and I'm happy to put this to the end of the meeting when we discuss Forward Plan, but not Forward Plan, our work programme, but that we do have time to be, as an information item, to look at the Climate Change Action Plan as part of our ongoing work.
I can certainly ask for further information, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Little, your hand did go up on the screen. Was that an error, or are you wishing to ask something?
I don't know if you can hear me, Chairman. I can't see the mute or unmute. Just for the record that I was present at the previous meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Little. I can see and hear you, and we'll note that oversight. Thank you. With all that said, we can agree those minutes. So we now move on to our second witness session for the review into Hillingdon's Adult Community Learning Service, pages 7 to 14. Welcome to Debbie. Please begin when you wish to do so.
Thank you, Chair. As tends to happen, I know that time is short and I know that councillors often have questions for us, so I'll keep this brief. I've provided a summary of where we are at the moment with our planning for next academic year. At this stage, it's quite early on and things frequently change details, but fundamentally you have the offer that we will be making out to residents. One thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that I've mentioned in the document that we've got the chance to apply for a GLA bid, Good Work for All. We're going to be submitting that tomorrow and we're going to apply for £200,000 over 2 years, which will start from August, September this year. We're going to be using our regular qualifications, regular programme for that, particularly in IT and business, digital skills and also health and social care. But we're also going to be developing another area in response to local need, which is creative industries. So that's an addition to the programme that I've written to you. I'm very, very grateful to my colleagues from Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham, Christy and Eamon respectively, for joining us tonight, so that you're able to get different perspectives on very similar job roles. So with that, I'll just hand over to you for questions.
Thank you very much. Are there members wishing to ask questions, please? Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Sweeting.
Sorry, I've had real problems with my computer today, so I do apologise. I'm looking at the audit that you've provided, and it does say GLA funding total 1.524 million. Is that correct? And so where does this additional GLA bid fit with that? And okay, could I also just look at the information that Hammersmith and Fulham have provided, which says that the GLA funding total is 2.8 million. So could you give some clarity on the GLA bid that you're providing? Is it in addition to the 1.5 million? And something about the difference between the Hammersmith and Fulham bid and Hillingdon's bid?
Okay, so if I take the bid first, we do get the opportunity sometimes to enter competitive bids for additional funding. I'm sure Eamon will speak to whether or not Hammersmith and Fulham are going to apply for the same bid. That is an additional to, in our case, we're going to apply for £200,000 over the 2 years. That will be in addition to everything else we've got. The figures that I've given you are for our last full year, which in our case was 2018-19. So since then, our core funding has risen slightly. We're closer to maybe 1.5 million, 1,550,000. It's that sort of money. It's not massively different, but it has increased slightly. And that tends to be because we have over-delivered over a period of time, because we've been lobbying the GLA as much as we can to try to increase that core funding, because we struggle to meet demand within our budget. We have to over deliver to meet the demand we've got locally for courses, for qualification courses in particular. The different levels of funding are based on historic decisions. I mean, I'm talking probably 20 years ago or more, and they are, when the GLA had the funding devolved to them a year, 18 months ago, they were given the same levels of historic funding were given out to us as they had inherited. That's probably nearly 2 years ago now, actually. There is talk occasionally of them taking a look at those funding levels and trying to even them up a bit more and looking at different criteria for how to allocate their overall funding. But there's been no action on that, partly because this whole thing has been fairly new to the GLA. They've had to learn about it a bit more, the whole adult education budget, but also because COVID and the pandemic sort of dominated everything. So they've kind of lost a year to that. So I'd be inclined to hand over to Eamon to start with, given that his area is his service is the one that you identified. But I would note that Christy in Ealing has less funding than we do, so the figures do vary quite a lot. Eamon, have you got anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Debbie. Yeah, it's just as Debbie says, really reiterating what she said, actually, that it is purely historic, some of the actual funding. And our grant, which we receive on an annual basis as well, is 2.8 million. We do have probably more enrolments, but again, that's due to the fact that we have to hit the allocation that we're actually provided with by now the GLA, previously the ESFA. And again, as Debbie says, they are looking at reviewing this. And we as a West London peer review group, Hillingdon, Ealing, Hounslow, Brent, Barnet and Southgate, have actually looked at this as a West London peer review group as well. So I think in the future, probably the GLA will look at this in more detail and look at the type of offer that we have and whether or not we're meeting the GLA requirements in terms of employment and skills and adult learning. So I think it's up for review as well.
Thank you. I've also seen an indication from Christy. Did you wish to comment on that as well, Christy?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to confirm what my colleagues have said, and Ealing is historically has been underfunded, and that continues to be the case despite the increasing number of enrollments. So, as Eamon said, we are all working together to lobby the GLA to review the way that the funding is allocated based on demand rather than historic data.
It is an issue that we all struggle with as service managers, and you know it is something that we would love to have redressed, all of us, I think.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sweeting, do you wish to follow up with a supplementary?
I just want to sort of clarify the venues that we use in Hillingdon. It seems to be quite different from the way that Ealing and Hammersmith are actually undertaking their adult learning. Is there a reason why we are much more limited to the venues, or have I got this information incorrect? Because Hillingdon is not using schools and children's centres, and are we using libraries? I don't know whether we are, so maybe some clarity, please.
Sure. Actually, we are using all of those, but again, I think that was just my omission, actually, because when I talk about outreach, I'm thinking of all those places, but of course I didn't write a list of them because it would be far too long. So we've been delivering in children's centres and schools for many years, except of course over the past year, and libraries as well, but we also deliver in third sector venues. So we'll go out, we will deliver absolutely anywhere that there is a class needed, if that is appropriate for that particular group. So we've got a large and ever-growing population of targeted outreach partners that we're working with, who are often very small third sector organisations, sometimes run by one or two people, sometimes much larger like Age UK and Mind. So depending on who we're working with, we deliver out in the community, or we will deliver in centres, or we will deliver online. And so most areas have a combination of those three, depending on the target audience we're working with for that particular class. Again, I wonder whether Eamon or Christy would like to add to that. What I would say is our Brookfield Centre is our most important centre in terms of our branding. People will rarely say Hillingdon Adult Learning. They'll 9 times out of 10 they'll say, I'm going to Brookfield, I'm going to Brookfield, even if they're heading off to Harlington or South Ruislip or a different centre. So for me, the centres are very, very important, but we do try to meet need wherever it is. Christy, would you like to say, is that okay for me to invite Christy in?
Yes, please do.
Yes, I actually wanted to comment on what Debbie has just said in terms of the importance of having a designated centre where learners identify themselves, but also where you can arrange anything and everything from team meetings, conferences, training, and more importantly, exams. In Ealing, yes, it is an advantage that we deliver courses across the borough in many of the centres that you have already mentioned. However, the fact that we don't have our own designated centre is a barrier, not only in terms of growth, but for example, during COVID, we had to postpone the exams because we couldn't bring the learners into a safe venue. Whereas, for example, if we had a venue like Brookfields, we would have been able to make arrangements to bring a group of learners at a time. So I think as it is essential to be out there in the community, it is also essential to have your own designated venue.
Thank you. I've also got Eamon wishing to comment. Eamon?
Yes, just briefly again, reiterating what my colleagues have said. The advantage of having your own centre means that you've actually got a focal point for adult learning. But again, we also do delivery out in the community in various different voluntary sector organisations, children's centres and schools. But it is very important to have a designated centre. It actually, it's part of our branding. It's also part of a safe place for adults to come and feel welcome and enjoy their learning in a conducive atmosphere.
Thank you, Christy. Sorry, I saw your hand go up again. Did you?
Sorry, Chair. If
Yep,
I may add that, in fact, Ealing is the only adult learning provider in West London that doesn't have a designated centre, and we are really looking into being able to procure one. So I think that hopefully gives you a sense of how important it is.
Thank you very much. Debbie, did you wish to comment further before I move on to the next question? Okay. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. Debbie, on the point of targeting groups with mental health issues, Hillingdon's draft curriculum plan on the topic of emotional health and wellbeing outlines a full non-qualifications programme. Is there enough capacity or funding capacity to allow for the impact the pandemic has had on mental health and potentially increased demand in this area?
Honestly, we make it happen, whether the funding's there or not. The courses that you're talking about, we offer free to residents because we don't want to put any barriers in the way of them accessing that support. We have, I mentioned earlier, we've over-delivered for the past probably 3-4 years by now. So we have our figures. So, I mean, we've got about, nowadays we've got about 850,000. That's the bit that's risen slightly for our qualification courses.
Yeah.
And we've still got our 701,000 for our community learning courses. The community learning courses are the ones that bring in the most of the fees, and for the people who can afford to pay. So for those people that are doing those personal development courses like French, German, art, you know, those sorts of old-fashioned leisure courses, as they were known, there is a fee attached to those, which is currently heavily subsidised, and the fees that come in are used up again by supporting those people that can't cope with that, who are often struggling with emotional health and well-being. Of course, mental health issues don't care about socioeconomic background. They affect anybody, and so whatever your background, whatever your financial position, you will be offered those courses free of charge. And we just make the courses work as best we can, and we're very good that those courses don't get put into the brochure for the simple reason that we want the ability to say there's a need over there we've spotted, we're going to go and put something on for that particular group. That's what we try to do.
That's lovely. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you very much. I assume we have no follow-up to that, Councillor Kaufman.
Just one thing.
Yes, of course.
As a matter of interest and praise for Hillingdon service, I'd like to mention 2 years ago, our hard-to-reach traveller community gained qualification levels in the area of floristry at South Bicep Library. So I thought you might be interested in that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Little.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask our witnesses, if I may, what permanent changes they think will follow from the COVID epidemic to the provision of the services.
Thank you very much. Shall we start with you, Eamon?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's one now that we're looking at immediately in terms of planning. The main thing is actually we will be continuing what we call blended learning. We hope that we'll be able to return to face-to-face provision, especially for those students that are more marginalised and hard to reach and actually find it difficult to learn online. There's a resource issue in some cases when we look at socio-economic deprivation as well for some communities. But really what we're looking at in terms of the response to COVID-19 is a blended learning offer going forward. And also, as has been touched on already, more programmes around health and wellbeing. I think there's been a recognition throughout this year that, you know, the level of self-isolation, the fact that people actually want to engage with other people and actually develop new skills, and in some cases have to around employment too. That's going to be a necessary factor in terms of our planning going forward.
Thank you. Christy, would you like to answer that as well?
Yes, very similar to what Eamon said. Definitely, we will be keeping a fraction on a percentage of our offer online. We have delivered online as my colleagues have during COVID, but we are looking forward to being able to come back to the classroom, particularly to meet certain groups like learners with learning disabilities and difficulties, the elderly, and some of the family learning programs where learners do not have the equipment or in some cases access to internet connections, so they have been somehow left behind. Although like my colleagues Debbie and Eamon, we have all gone out of our way to support learners by sending them a pack of materials, etc. So in the case of Ealing, Ealing Other Learning is part of the Employment Learning and Skills service. So, and this is new. This is as of December 2019. So we have strengthened the links with the employment and the brokerage team. So this has enabled us to deliver more employability programs, but also to support people who have been impacted by COVID with health and well-being courses and employability outcome courses. So we will definitely be making use of these programs more in future.
Thank you. Mr. Little, would you like a supplementary? Okay, thank you very much. We go on to Councillor Mavis, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, thank you to the witnesses and Deborah, good luck in the bid coming out and all parties in that. My question is around funding from the local authority. So it'd be really useful to get an understanding from the other boroughs what level of funding is provided by your local authority and kind of what proportion of that is part of the kind of fees concessions, you know, to make it more accessible, and in what areas you target those subsidies of fees.
Thank you very much. Christy, would you like to go first?
Yes. So Ealing Other Learning doesn't receive any funding from the council. So all the funding that we receive is external via the GLA, and we also received a small amount, about £18,000 per year from the ESFA, Education Skills Funding Agency. With regards to the fees, again, very similar to the process system in Hillingdon and Hammersmith. We have concessions for learners who are on benefits. Like Hillingdon, all the health and well-being courses are offered for free. And for the family learning program, we offer a much reduced fee on the fee-paying courses. Yes, but that's all agreed by ourselves with the council, but we do not have any funding from Ealing Council to push against concessions, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Eamon?
Similar to Christy, we don't receive any direct funding from the local authority. We're grant funded as well through the GLA and ESFA. However, we don't pay rental on the building, our main building in the centre of Hammersmith. But we do obviously accrue fees from the courses that we're offering. And we charge fairly high fees, cost recoverable fees to people that can afford to pay. And we also have lower fees for those that can't, and concessions as well. Quite a generous concession for our students, similar that are on benefits, and for wider family learning too. So I think it's a very similar picture actually in terms of what we do, other than the fact that we actually have a building that we don't have to pay a rental for, but we then accrue fees and pay fees towards the local authority.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mavis, do you wish to follow up?
I do, yes. My supplementary isn't this, but if I could just quickly ask, I assume in Hillingdon there's no rental charge of the building. I mean, if my assumption's wrong, I'm happy to be corrected. But in terms of, like, there's obviously a lot of working between the three of you and other boroughs, which is fantastic. And so I suppose it would be useful to find out kind of what value that adds. You can see it in the way you work and talk to us, but just particularly with things like targeting those who are less likely to engage with services, education, who may need it in kind of vulnerable groups, but also how you kind of pitch offers, and if there's much kind of residents going to other boroughs to get the course they may like, and how that's kind of managed.
Would you like me to answer that? Chair, shall I carry on?
Yes, please, Deborah.
There are all kinds of benefits. We manage to meet, now online, about once every couple of months, and it's a real support for all of us. We talk about the challenges we're facing. We talk about the different ideas we've got to overcome them. We share good practice. We arrange training sessions. On average, I'd say it's probably once a year, but sometimes it's more often than that for staff, where we will get together and we'll standardise all of our observations of teaching and learning, or we'll standardise various sort of forms that we all need to have and use with learners, so that we learn from each other all the time. We've had examples where we have put in joint bids. So we had a flexible learning fund bid that we put in together some years ago. That was fantastic, and actually certainly in Hillingdon's case, and I'm sure with the others, really helped us when lockdown came, because we already had staff familiar with how to deliver an online learning class. It's not something that we were taught before, because when we all trained, there wasn't any online learning, there was barely any internet. So there have been serious benefits. In addition, every year, each of us is charged with writing a self-assessment review, and we report, and which sort of summarises the strengths and weaknesses of your own service, and it's a big piece of work, and we all check that for each other. We basically move them around, so everybody reads somebody else's and feeds back, and again you get that standardisation and that critique from people who understand exactly what you're trying to achieve and know whether you're doing well or not. So they would be my responses to that. I don't know if the others have anything to add.
Thank you, Deborah. Eamon and Christy, would you like to add anything?
I would like to add, thank you, Chairman. Yes, in addition to our heads of service meeting, we also have a quality peer review meeting, an MIS peer review meeting, which again are very, very useful for our teams to share good practice, to support one another with quality assurance and improvement, and also for tutors to share ideas in terms of resources, etc. we also participated very actively during the period of the funding devolution, and we were instrumental in advising the West London Alliance in terms of the adult community policy, etc. Maybe Eamon, you want to pick up from here because you sit on the employment boards.
Yes, that's right. I represent. It's a rolling peer review, but I represent the West London ACL Adult Community Learning Providers on the West London Employment and Skills Board for adult education to feed into that. And so I take advice and support from my colleagues, both Deborah and Christian, the other West London ACL providers, when we go to those actual meetings to talk about how adult education is contributing to the skills agenda across London as well. And I think the other thing to talk about too is that, there's so much value in the peer support that we have right through from the heads of service to the management information services and the observation of teaching and learning teams and quality teams, that you really can't put a price on that. And the quality assurance also prepares us for inspection. We've all been supporting each other throughout the many inspections that we've had over the years, and it's seen as a strength by Ofsted as well. We have a very solid West London peer review group for adult community learning.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to thank all the officers for everything that they've done during this pandemic. Trying to keep a service going, no matter where you are, is extremely difficult. And so, from me, thank you very much for what you've been doing. Looking forward, we've heard in the media about the mental impact that this pandemic is having on not just the children, but also the adults. And I'm just wondering what plans you have going forward, how to pick those up and supply support and help, advice, and to show that, hey, it's not all like that. There is a way out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Well, what we're doing is working, so we're carrying on with that. We are still reaching out to our community outreach learners and our partners in the community, as I'm sure the others will tell you the same. So we're doing things like providing, basically every time we speak to a partner, they might come in saying, we really want to do, I don't know, a Spanish class or something, and we are, as soon as we say yes, that's great, we can organise that for you, we've got an emotional health and wellbeing class on the offer as well, and we say, would anybody be interested in this? So we try to make sure that the provision is widely available and very easy to access. Obviously, in some cases, they just don't need it. Ironically, one of the groups that really embraced going online during the pandemic and has continued to was a group of carers from the Hillingdon carers team who have been studying Spanish mainstream online, and it's been brilliant for their mental health because they haven't had to get respite workers in while they've gone off to a class. So there have been certain things that have caught us by surprise. We're also working with partners across the council. We're building, we've got a long way to go with this, but we're building more and more partnerships with people, particularly in the children's social care team. I was talking to a group of housing officers earlier today about how they can refer people in that they're concerned about, because they're dealing with those people that were homeless, that sort of were given temporary accommodation during the lockdown, and now they need to be identified, found somewhere a bit more permanent to live, and they were asking about how to refer in. So we're setting up more and more ways to do that with council colleagues, and it's a big part of our offer. So we're about to start work on the brochure for next year. Obviously everything goes on the web. And so we're going to be putting boxes in the brochure all the way through saying, you know, this is available, it's free to you, come and join us. We also assess all of the people that have enrolled in our classes. We offer them, it's not mandatory, we offer them an optional wellbeing assessment, which is basically a sort of a tick list. How do you feel? It's based on some robust anxiety and depression assessments that are used nationally by councillors and so on. And we just reduced some of the questions, made it a bit more user friendly. And actually what we found is I think I might have mentioned this actually, by giving them this assessment online to complete, we're finding we're getting a better response. And if we get somebody who has scored highly, which means that they are sort of significantly experiencing anxiety or depression or whatever it happens to be, we've got a support mechanism in place. So they start with telephone calls, they might have meetings, they might have learning support, they might just need someone to talk to. So that's how we're approaching. We're trying to approach it in lots of different ways so that we capture as many people as we can. And there's definitely not going anywhere. It's definitely staying as a core part of the offer.
Thank you. Before I invite Eamon and Christy, Neil, did you raise your hand? Yep.
I did, but it's just something to remark on once this question's done. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Christy, Eamon, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll just add really to what Deborah's already said. In terms of health and wellbeing, where we recognise that there's a need, we will provide programmes. And like Hillingdon, we have a number of different partners that we work with in the voluntary sector organisations. We work with Mind, for instance. We work with Action on Disability. We work with our residents' involvement team as well to identify those particular residents that might need that level of support and get them signposted to provision that we're offering. I think that's really important. I think also in terms of the outreach, we've recognised that obviously with online learning, it's been difficult for some people who may struggle with mental health and don't have the resources to actually engage with us throughout this pandemic. And what we've tried to do, and I know Hillingdon have done this and Ealing and others as well, is identify, if you like, the digitally excluded is the term we use, I guess. For those that don't have laptops or resources or tablets, we've identified many students or potential students that don't have that and their families. And we've provided either reconstituted laptops or tablets that we have, or we've actually put in bids as well in some cases to actually procure new resources for them. So, but definitely going forward, health and wellbeing, I think the value of adult learning has been raised in terms of its profile because of the value it has for health and well-being, definitely. And I think it's a very pertinent point that you make.
Thank you. Christy, do you wish to say anything?
Yes, exactly as Eamon and Debbie have detailed, we continue with the extensive offer of health and well-being, which is all free, and we work with partners, both internal with other council services like the resident involvement team or public health, but also with external partners like voluntary organizations like GOZAD or Neighbourly Care. We work with MenCap, we work with housing associations, etc. In the way that, as Eamon was saying, one of the strengths of adult learning is that we have the flexibility to develop bespoke offer for those who need it. So maybe a course offered to the elderly in sheltered accommodation is different to the course offered for a group in a different situation. And I think, again, that's the strength of adult community learning, the fact that we can work with partners, we can identify the need, and like Debbie was saying earlier, we can design a course and offer it where the need is. Yes, I think that's the real strength.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan, do you wish to comment further on this?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Just quickly, are we sitting back and waiting for them to, or those? Are we waiting for the those that are in need or in, shouting, "Hey, I need some help"? Are we waiting for them to come to us, or are we actually going out and saying, "Look, we are here. Let's help you"?
Yeah, no, we absolutely are going out and saying, "Look, we're here. Let's help you." That's what I was talking about with the targeted outreach. So, but also with the partnership work more widely. I mean, we've started to work with My Health Hillingdon, who are focused not. I mean, it is mental health, but it's more about long-term illnesses and helping people find ways to deal with them better and manage those illnesses better. And what we're planning to do, we've not started it yet, but what we're planning to do is have an offer that is based in our centres where there will be GP, or obviously online alternatively, and there will be GPs, there will be nurses, there will be all sorts of people who will be there to answer questions. And what we're planning is that when you've got adults with learning difficulties, for instance, who will absolutely be in centres, they will come in. We'll have spent a couple of weeks working with them as part of the classes, not taking it over, but as part of the classes to try to establish, what are the things that worry you and what are the questions you'd like to ask if you had a GP in front of you and you could ask them anything, to try to bring that out. But that's a very good example of the kind of thing that we're doing. And Thoria, that you met last time, is leading on that for her area. But that is echoed right across the community and the curriculum. So we tend to find the big sort of risk areas are low skilled English, maths, ESOL learners. ESOL because obviously they don't always have the language, but native born English who aren't confident with their English, and particularly when they're not confident with reading and writing, and there are too many of those people, aren't also confident at going to speak to a GP or going to ask for help anywhere else because they're used to behaving very defensively. So we do a lot of work with the people that we've got, and then we run events. Normally, it's difficult this year, but we run events to bring others in. We'll say, come along and bring a friend. We sort of do a buy one, get one free type promotion to bring them in. And we've also got a lot of volunteers that we've trained and worked with for some time. We've got about 60 volunteers now who are fantastic advocates because they aren't the teacher and they aren't the teaching assistant. They are a volunteer. They sit, and very often somebody will say something and they'll immediately disclose, and they won't kind of break any confidences, but they'll draw our attention to it and then we can swoop in. So we try all kinds of ways to reach people. But I think overall, I think trying to improve the knowledge about the service and the range of support we offer actually is something that we could improve. We work very well with corporate comms, but again, they're only one team and there's a limit to what they can do. So I do think there is I'm sure there are some ways in which we could do this better. I'm not saying we've got all the answers, but we certainly, we try.
Thank you very much. Neil, do you wish to ask your question now before I go on to the next member?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. It's only a quick one. I'm just conscious that obviously we're focusing quite a lot on West London here. Just in terms of a broader sense of information for the committee as part of the ongoing review, I wondered whether the witnesses could highlight any particularly novel or unique ideas of best practice that other people are doing elsewhere in the country, or even whether there's any published reviews that they could point me to that I can then research and provide the committee with that information.
Thank you. Eamon or Christy, would you like to come in on that?
Yes. Well, we are all part of a national organisation called HOLEX. They are a national and adult community learning organisation, and as such, we all participate in webinars, events, conferences, etc. And we're very much informed of policy and changes ahead. In terms of good practice, I think we are all very much doing a very similar thing, and this is linking it back to HOLEX, which allows us to share good practice and to learn from one another, and in fact we can ask for advice and ideas at this forum as well. So I mean, it may sound a little bit arrogant, but actually I believe, and you can see from the recent inspections of the West London community services, and indeed the three of us here today, that I don't think that we are missing a trick. I think we are doing extremely well, and on many occasions we are asked to share good practice with other colleagues. Yes, I think Amo, would you?
Yeah, I just totally agree with what you're saying there. HOLEX is obviously the national organisation that's working with adult community learning and local authorities. There's also LEAFIA, which is a London and nationwide programme for education and further education that we're involved with. And also the Education Training Foundation, ETF, is also an organisation that we work with to actually improve practice of teachers, but all the way through to senior managers and governors as well. And there's been various different programs recently around the digital ACE program, which is the adult community education program, which again is a response to COVID-19 and digital inclusiveness. So there's lots of really good practice out there that we all try and take benefit from. And I think even this Friday, there's another HOLEX meeting this week around the London providers, and we'll all be attending that too. So there's a lot out there that we're able to draw on in terms of good practice.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add to that? One thing I would say, Neil, is when we began this, I sent you over a couple of recent publications, both of which were about, one was a Parliamentary Select Committee report, and the other one was a document, a booklet written just not long ago, maybe a year ago, about the roles of governance, the role of governors, and the role of members, elected members, in challenging, leading on and supporting adult community learning providers in their council. So they're probably the best two documents that are the most current and the most comprehensive for you to refer to. And they went out, I believe, with the very first meeting, but it's been, it might be the second, I'm not quite sure now. And just for the record, really, just to mention that I've been on the policy forum for HOLEX for 12 years or something, representing them in terms of adults with learning difficulties and teacher training. And I've also been a board member of HOLEX for the past 6 or 7 years. So in terms of West London, I've just taken up the lead representative role for West London ACL into the main HOLEX meeting for London, basically, so that we can feed back as one across London to the GLA or to whoever it is that we need to feed back to. So just so that you know, really, that's the status. Hillingdon are well represented, I think, as are West London.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask, what challenges have other authorities faced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how did they overcome them, please?
Thank you very much. We'll go straight to our witnesses then. Should we start with you, Eamon?
It's a very good question. I mean, there's lots of challenges that we've all faced. One of the challenges that we had as an adult community learning provider was that we were asked to lead on the Community Action Network volunteer programme, along with actually running our programme for adult learning. And that was quite an undertaking. That was working to recruit volunteers in the community to support people that were self-isolating, were shielding, to provide support around food banks and personal shopping for prescriptions as well. So we had to work with all the volunteer organisations around Hammersmith and Fulham. We recruited over 2,000 volunteers for that at the time. So that was quite a challenge. The other challenge is that we've actually lost quite considerable income as a consequence of the pandemic. And the GLA, I have to say, have been incredibly supportive throughout this period. They've continued to fund us and support us. But obviously that has implications for us as a service, and we have to look at our financial balances, as it were, and make decisions about our structures internally as well. And like all local authorities, I think, they've been very stretched in terms of responding to the pandemic and dealing on a day-to-day basis with residents that have really struggled with the last year. So there's a number of different areas I think we've had to face challenges in.
Thank you very much, Christy.
Yes, it's a very similar picture for Ealing. As a local authority, like Eamon said, very stretched. Ealing Adult Learning is part of community development, so we were asked to support with food bank, with the volunteering, with the Ealing Together volunteering program, and also, as I said, with the NHS recruitment for the vaccination process, etc. Also, our learner numbers have been impacted by COVID. At the end of the last academic year, we lost a percentage of learners, but we were able to maintain as many as possible. This year, our learner numbers are down, and like Eamon said, the GLA have been very supportive, and we have been given assurance that we are not going to lose the funding, but that we will be able to carry over the funding to next year. However, the issue is still because we don't have our own centre, is when the schools and children's centres will feel confident to bring back the adult learning programs. That's a challenge that is still very much there for us, really.
Thank you very much. Debbie, yep. If you can briefly. Yep.
Briefly, very, very similar. Our biggest challenges have definitely been lower enrolments, which lead to lower fees. So we've got a much lower, significantly, probably about half our fee income this year. And also we've got a bit of a traffic jam with some vocational learners, because if you're doing, for instance, childcare qualification, you must do some work experience alongside the theory to meet the criteria to pass the qualification. We've got people that finished a course in the last couple of weeks, but they can't move on to the next course because they've not been able to do any work experience. So we're trying to find ways around that. We've got people working with adults with learning difficulties in their classes, and we're trying to observe how they manage. But that's been very challenging, because it then limits the progression of those residents, and it will ultimately stop them going into a job at the end, because there are fewer jobs and because they haven't got their qualification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you wish to follow up, Councillor Sullivan?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just one question that, so to speak, popped out during an earlier discussion. Reference was made to teaching Spanish, and obviously in my head I assumed that the people being taught Spanish would be English speakers, so to speak. So I just wanted to ask, what demands do you have for, I presume, learning English from non-English speakers? I'm assuming, for example, over the years, demand has changed. Stereotypically, we've now got a lot of Polish people living in the country, so therefore one assumes that you've got demand for Polish people learning English. I just wondered the extent of the demand and how it changes over time. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so primarily it's Asian. It very much fits with the borough profile. So we've got about 51% white British to 49% white British currently. But other than that, we're fairly close to the borough profile, so it would be the same kind of thing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chalmers, you wish to follow up?
No, it's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Time is marching on a bit. We've been on this topic for nearly an hour now, so I will take 2 more, but if you can just keep the questions brief in both question and answer. If we do have further questions, by all means, please pass them on to Neil and he will circulate them to the officers and we'll report back at the next meeting. But because we have a heavy agenda this evening, I do need to move on with other items. But we'll start with Mr. Little and then Councillor Sweeting to finish, and then I will ask or invite our witnesses to just give any final thoughts or comments before we close. Mr. Little.
I wanted to ask about the balance between courses that lead to qualifications and those that don't. Is that something that is entirely within the choice of the authority concerned, or is there a push towards doing more exam-based courses or fewer?
Okay, so we're given 2 different funding streams. One is for non-qualification courses, the other is for qualifications. And so with non-qualification courses, you are given a lump of money, and it's up to you to make sure you take that out and you reach the most disadvantaged learners and engage them in learning. And that's the targeted outreach I was talking about. There's an element of that that's also used for the typical sort of leisure courses. Although I know in Eamon's situation, they do full cost recovery, which is not unusual. There are lots of local authorities who, for those typical leisure courses that before this, you probably would have assumed was all we did, they can be charged at full cost recovery if that's a decision that's made locally. In terms of the qualification courses, we have a different level of funding. So if you look on the documents we've given you some for qualifications and some for not. Certainly I've defined them like that. With those, you start from 0, you have an allocation of whatever that amount happens to be, and every single enrolment earns a different amount of money depending on the qualification, depending on the employment status of the learner, depending on where they live. There are all sorts of very complicated formulas that lead to each particular enrolment drawing down certain amounts of money. If they're doing an English course, for instance, that is fully funded. So if the course for a learner costs £100, then that's how much you will draw down from your funding. If you get enough £100, you hit your funding target. Then again, if they live in a deprived area in a particular postcode, they might get £120. So each individual enrolment draws down a different amount of funding. And our job is to manage those enrolments, gather that information, put the funding claims in, which are checked and checked and checked automatically, and hit those targets. And that's what I talked about earlier when I said we were over delivering over the past several years, because we are delivering something like 120%. We were before the lockdown of our funding targets for qualifications. And that's how our funding has gone up a little bit, because sometimes, if there's enough money, they might give you a little bit more. And if you get that funding in that main grant, then it stays, whereas bids come and go. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sweeting.
Well, thank you very much, and can I thank all of the officers that have given evidence this evening, and can I also say that you have been and continue to be lifesavers. So thank you again for all the work you're doing. There's just a couple of points. Are there some winners and losers in respect to the GLA funding? Do we know if there's some boroughs, London boroughs, that do seem to get a significant amount more than other London boroughs, and we know that there's historical reasons for that, but it would be interesting to see how this GLA funding has gone over the last few years. And just as a very parochial question, what's going to happen when Harlington is knocked down to the adult learning centre there? Is it going to be in the new school as well? And while the new school is being built, where is it going to be placed, please?
Okay, so in terms of the funding, yes, there are winners and losers. So, for instance, there are 7 boroughs in terms of funding, 7 boroughs in the west. Eamon is in the Hammersmith and Fulham, not Eamon. Hammersmith and Fulham are in the top sort of section of that, hovering around the 3 million, a little under, with Hounslow and Brent, whereas Christie and Harrow, in Ealing and Harrow are in the bottom bit of that, with, as you can see, significantly less funding than we get. We're the third one up, so we are third from lowest funded, and this is purely, I don't understand how it was agreed originally, but it was from a good 20 years ago, and it's just never been looked at. So there are winners and losers, and it is something that we need to continue to lobby about. In terms of Harlington, yes, it is something that we're working with a wider council team on. The plans are well underway for the Harlington build. There will be a significant reduction in the space that we have to deliver classes in, but we're working really hard to try to minimise the impact. And actually, ironically, the big shift that we've had to online learning will help us cope with the change that's going to be happening in Harlington. My understanding is that the build will happen while that's actually going on, other than the car park being affected, which will absolutely create complaints, but we can't do anything about the car parks being affected because the building equipment will need to be in there. We are going to continue to run in the school, just as the school are going to run while the build is happening. And then in a couple of years' time, when the build is finished, there will be a week or 2 when classes unless they're online, they'll have to stop, which will be as the build is finally handed over, the final bits are finished, and we move in. And we're just going to have to manage as best we can. So we've worked with Dan and lots of other officers, Sarah, all sorts of people, to try to minimise the impact of that. But the fact is there will be less floor space, there will be fewer classrooms, and it will present challenges. So we're looking at, we're hoping to be able to find a better long-term solution, because obviously the school is being shifted because the demand for school places is such that they need to grow, which means ultimately we are going to have to find another venue. And so we're starting to sort of think about that at the moment, but we haven't got very far with that just yet. I hope that answers it for you.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting. Do you wish to say anything further?
No, that's my final question. Thank you very much to all of the officers this evening.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to a close nearly. I will just finally invite our witnesses, Eamon and Christie, if they would like to add any further comment on what they've heard and talked about this evening, and perhaps any potential suggestions to form part of our recommendations for this review. Thank you. Eamon?
I'd just like to say really that in terms of the West London peer review group that we have as ACL heads, it's the recognition of the value that it's given to all of our services in terms of making sure that we continually improve our offer and working together to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our residents across West London. It's been a great value on a personal level, but also in terms of our local authority, we really highly value that. So, and we wish you all well in Hillingdon as well. So thank you for allowing us to speak tonight.
Thank you very much, Eamon, and it's a pleasure having you here this evening. Christie?
Yes, thank you. I echo Eamon's words. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I wish you luck. I know that you are in very good hands with Deborah. You've seen the latest Ofsted report that Hillingdon and Adult Learning did extremely well. And yes, just thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Christy, and thank you for your attendance and participation this evening. It's very much appreciated. And Deborah, thank you for your presentation this evening as well. It's very much appreciated. You're all free to leave whenever you wish to do so. If you wish to stay on, please feel free to do that as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We move on now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We now move on to item 6, which is our update on tree planting in the borough. Who's been waiting very patiently, Stuart. Whenever you're free to do so, Stuart, please give us an overview of this report, and we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me. I will keep it brief as required. The report basically sets out what we are currently achieving through tree planting and projects being undertaken in the borough. I think the headline figures are that we have planted this year 6,250 trees, but only removed 215. So our tree canopy cover is increasing at this time. We're looking at a lot of different ways to increase the amount of trees we plant and trying to move away from the traditional street tree planting, which for trees is a very hostile environment. So we're looking at shelter belts and other things like that, and different ways of doing those things. I think really you'll all have seen the report and what's in it. So if I just open up for questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I will start with Councillor Chapman, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Stuart. I found it a very interesting report, very informative. Just one quick question. In terms of tree coverage, I know there are various statistics in terms of, I think in England it's 10% and in Scotland it's 19%, that sort of thing. And I think the UK is 13%. Is there a target, so to speak, for the tree coverage in Hillingdon to be achieved at a future date? Also, as sort of part 2 of that question, you mentioned, I think, 6,250 year to date, so to speak, or in the last year of measurements. Is there a target to achieve each year a certain minimum number? Thank you, Chairman.
Our current target at the moment isn't set in stone in any way. We're hoping every year to achieve at least 1 for 1. So every tree that is removed, at least one other is replaced. But we're actually coming together at the moment with the council's planning service to create a strategy all around, linking to the urban forest plan, opportunities section 106 funding. So hopefully as part of that strategy, we'll have some quite stretching targets for increasing the number of trees and the number of and the canopy cover. We don't have an accurate canopy cover for Hillingdon, and hopefully that will be part of that strategy as well, that we get a point in time now that we can then look to grow from.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chapman, do you wish to follow up?
I don't, Chairman. Apart from one point, which isn't really related to this, do we have accurate data on TPOs within in terms of a ward by ward basis?
Yes, we do. We have records of every single TPO. Some are a little bit vague in the fact that they're area TPOs, so it's species reliant, not numbers of specific trees. But yes, for every 700 odd TPOs we have a map, we have a record of every single one that's available, and that is on the council's GIS website as well. If you go there, look under planning, you can find the individual TPOs and then links to those as well.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to point out there are members indicating they wish to ask questions by raising their hands. When I lower your hand, that is take it as I've acknowledged your request and you'll be called upon shortly, so there's no need to keep raising it. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Stuart, I'd like to say thank you to you and all your colleagues for the hard work that you guys have been doing, trying to keep this fantastic borough green and healthy. I know that you're involved a lot with the Ruislip Lido and the woods all around there. So thank you very much. And also congratulations to you guys for making Hillingdon Tree City of the World. Only 9 other UK councils have reached that target. So thank you very much and well done on achieving that. You mentioned briefly that we're not looking at replacing, or we're not looking at doing trees on the public highways anymore. It's unfortunate, it's sad in my instance where, it used to be 15, 20 years ago, you'd go into a particular road and you've got an avenue of trees, but now it's blank, it's empty. They've all been removed. It's dropped down curbs or just concrete everywhere. Is there any way that we can turn that round a little bit more and get more trees actually on the highway? Thank you.
Yeah, we're not moving away from it completely. We're just trying to look for places. Our mantra is right tree, right place. Some of these narrow highways are very, very hostile environments for trees to survive. They also cause damage and property damage and things like that. So there are ongoing insurance claims related to those trees as well. So we're not excluding it. And we actually looked at a pilot project in one of the Ruislip wards where we were actually proposing to put trees into the street as a bit of a traffic calming, so they were actually going to be in the carriageway. Unfortunately, the residents weren't very keen on that as an idea, but it's something that we've seen has worked in Australia, and it's just about that, how we can make that hostile environment more successful for tree growth, but also increase our numbers in different ways as well, in green space, in big grass verges and stuff like that. But it will be a perennial problem with cars and wanting to access their front gardens, preventing tree planting as well.
Councillor Morgan, just follow up?
No, I'm good on it. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you. If I could just add an observation of my own as well. One of the other things about the planting them in roads in particular is during the summer months, we tend to play catch up with new trees where we have to keep watering them. Whereas if they're all in one place in an open space, I suppose it's a lot easier for the officers to maintain. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Stuart. Nice to see you. Great report. Really good, and like my colleague Councillor Morgan, to get cities of the world status is quite something else. So that well done to all the Green Spaces team. My question to you is that during COVID, I've been up at the Lido doing my exercises, walking around quite a bit, and what I've noticed is that there's a hell of a lot of fallen trees. There's a lot of dead branches on some of the big trees that could cause sort of damage or even sort of injury to walkers or cyclists. Have we got a strategic management plan for the ancient woodlands, which is what these are? And they're such an amazing resource and they're so well used. This is my question. Have we got a strategic plan for these woods?
Yes, we do. So Ruislip Woods National Nature Reserve has a plan that is agreed with Natural England and the Ruislip Woods Management Advisory Group, and that sets our policies out. Trees on walking routes that are statutory paths are inspected annually. Levels of dead wood are actually very, very good in woodlands. So the sort of standard is if your woodland is very, very healthy, there should be 70% dead wood within that wood because of the ecosystem that it creates. So it's a hard managing act with full public access to keep the dead wood in check, but they are all inspected by Sophie and Martina in the team to ensure that they're safe. And although there are big lumps of dead wood, particularly in oak trees, that doesn't make them unsafe. So those kind of inspections are happening, and we're ensuring that the public are as safe as they can be.
That's great, Stuart. Just finally, I'd just like to thank your guys at the Lido, all of them that work there on various jobs. They do an absolutely super job, and it's such a precious resource for us. Just one final question. We've got this sort of situation outside schools with idling, and it seems to me that there isn't a message outside schools which actually says you are not allowed to idle outside schools or whatever. Does that come under your remit, Stuart, or is that highways?
It doesn't come under mine. Obviously, we're informing the planting schemes that are going into schools, but the actual Highways Act and no idling business, unfortunately, that falls outside of what I'm responsible for.
Okay. Well, thanks for everything you do, Stuart. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I will pass on your comments to the team at the Lido.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Little, you indicated, I assume it's education related, is it? Go ahead.
Yes, Chairman, of course it is. I did want to ask the last question as well, but you talk in the report about trees round schools helping to reduce pollution that the children suffer from. But can you say something about the extent to which schools are involved actively in the planning for such green walls in their area? And is any effort made to involve pupils as educational factors in it?
Yeah, I mean, we're involving the schools in all of the decisions about what is planted. We leave that to the teachers to engage with the children, but we're providing all that information for them. We're also engaging with schools in all of our community planting projects, obviously pre-COVID. We had a big planting project at Field End Recreation Ground, and Trees for City managed to get 5 or 6 different local schools involved in that planting scheme, both physically and in the school, giving that kind of educational resource. So yes, we do involve schools as much as we can in all of our green space management and planting projects as much as we possibly can.
So you do provide information in a pupil-friendly form?
I believe so. It doesn't come from my team particularly, but yes, that's shared with the schools, and then the schools then choose how to implement that within their age ranges.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much. Can I go back to the Hillingdon being Tree City of the World? This looks to be quite a new initiative because it was only awarded in 2020. So is this award applied for, or is it gained by evidence and inspection?
So it's applied for, and we have to meet certain criteria through an application to Tree City for the World. So it was quite a lengthy application form demonstrating what we're doing, the numbers of trees we're planting, etc., and then that was then peer reviewed, and we were awarded the award. It's new for Hillingdon. This is the first year we've tried.
Right.
Councillor Sweeting.
Could I have a follow-up question about the green hedges?
Yes, of course.
Can we have an audit of the schools that have got the provision of the green hedges around schools, and an audit of those about to be provided with such hedges? And also, can we have an audit of planting and tree planting schemes in areas where monitors are showing the high levels of pollution by the air monitoring that we do as a council? Because what's concerning me is some of the areas that I know are very, very well do not seem to be having the trees planted next door to road systems where there are very high levels of pollution.
Okay, so the scheme that's currently in its 3rd phase is reported through HIP, So HIP received the updates of where the hedges have been placed, and I presume they are responsible for the programme going forward, but I'm sure that can be provided.
Particularly tree planting, you know, in areas with very high pollution levels, because although the report suggests that it's only inner London that have got these high levels of pollution, it really is not so, with some, you know, areas very close to the motorways and close to the airport, of course.
I believe a lot of this will come under air quality. I can see Neil indicating. Neil, do you wish to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Obviously, if Stuart can provide that level of data, then that'd be great. But I'm just conscious that it may fall under the air quality action plan stuff that the committee's obviously had in the past and will have again as part by way of an update. But Stuart can advise, and I can liaise with Stuart outside the meeting in terms of that kind of data.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mavis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to conserve battery on my device, hence the camera being off occasionally. If I may, I mean, I do want to echo a little bit of Councillor Sweeting's comment around, you know, making sure that the walls are in the place where we know that there are schools on 35 units, for example, quite a lot around key motorway junctions. But also, in terms of tree planting, it's great to see, you know, an uplift in the tree planting, a great partnership with Trees for Cities. I know the Mayor is throwing a lot of money at trees because we need to increase our levels, and I suppose I'm a little concerned that we are just replacing one for one, when I'm sure the team is ambitious to do as many as possible. In terms of air quality, trees are extremely good at capturing carbon, as you stated, and the diversity is great. My concern is that it's quite an easy win, I'm not saying it's an easy task, but an easy win to continue to plant in areas where it's already very green, where there's already a managed tree population, rather than necessarily those areas that are more urban and could do with the tree coverage to reduce carbon and increase air quality. What measures and checks do you have internally, and what ways are you looking to strategically make sure that the areas with the highest toxins, highest carbon, have good tree coverage? Because I know, for example, we've seen recently on the M4, all of the trees come down along that border. Unfortunately, I'm sure they'll be replaced, but we've just lost mature trees and they're being replaced with saplings, and that carbon-wise is a nightmare. But also the barrier to the residents on those corridors is heartbreaking, with the noise and the impact on them automatically with the poor air quality. So not just on highways, but in terms of urban areas, what's the plan to make sure we can really feel the benefit in every area of Hillingdon of tree planting?
Yeah, we plan to improve tree planting across the board, and that's why we've entered the partnership with Trees for Cities to ensure that their expertise around inner London planting and planting in urban areas can bring that to the fore as well. One of the benefits of the Tree Cities for the World also is that across the world there are a number of organisations with different challenges to us in Hillingdon that we're hoping to learn from and get trees into more hostile environments, as I referred to earlier, the actual tree planting within the highway, so that, you know, there are more trees in those urban areas. Unfortunately, that wasn't acceptable in the area we tried, but that's something we want to bring more, because there is some benefits there about highway drainage as well. So how tree planting can help draining areas as well, which also has a benefit. So we are looking. I think the key document is going to be the strategy going forward. So we haven't got a tree strategy at the moment, and I think we need that to then set the challenges for us and give us our vision for the future.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan.
Oh, sorry, may I have a supplementary, please?
Sorry, Councillor Mavis, I'm losing my mind. I thought you did ask a supplementary. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I just had asked a very long first question. Sorry. So it's around the tree sapling. So you spoke about coverage, trying to map out where the trees are. I know that I'm constantly questioning myself about whether I want to cut a tree down in the back garden. And so residents' trees, I'm seeing a trend myself where residents are taking out trees to increase parking and other things. The sapling programme was fantastic. How much do we know? How many of those do we know were actually planted? And what kind of communication or messaging can be put out to discourage residents from felling trees on their own land?
Okay, so obviously the legislation is a help. So where we protect trees, and the team are looking to, you know, trees of note and value we are always looking to protect those through the tree preservation orders. Obviously, conservation areas we have some control. I think the messaging needs to come from Hillingdon, yes, but it also needs to come from local government, national government, about the value of trees, and I think that is improving. The work we're doing with Trees for Cities, again, is about public engagement and getting more people engaged with trees so that they know their values and can try and influence their neighbours and everybody not to cut trees down in such a way. We are losing more and more trees in residential properties, and I think the pandemic has not helped that, because people are valuing that space but want it to be free of trees and maximise their garden space.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan.
This time lucky, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for letting me speak on this. Stuart, you mentioned that we have a net planting of 6,000 trees for. This obviously is only on council land. Yep. Knowing that we've got such large projects going through, things going through Hillingdon, you know, we've got HS2, the possible threat of the third runway, and other things like that, and people digging up their front gardens and tarmacking or concreting over everything. What can we do to try and sort of like, actually, you know, it's not 6,000, we're possibly negative as a whole over the borough. What can we do to try and sort of like stop this and start making not just the north, but definitely in the south, where, you know, they're affected a lot more than we are here. Sort of like, come on, let's get this place green. Let's make it better for the residents and obviously the wildlife that entices.
Okay, so with regards to the major projects, HS2, if the third runway was ever to be built, obviously there's planning obligations there, and colleagues in Ian Thine's team have insisted that planting is happening on HS2 route and everything like that. And again, there is a net gain. Obviously, it can never replace the ancient trees and blocks of woodland that have been removed, but we're doing as much as we can through the legislation available to us to insist that these big developers replant trees, provide more trees. I know HS2 have also put in lots of money for community woodland planting and things like that, so we need to be accessing those things. On smaller developments, so planning houses being built on sites, we're also very actively in ensuring that developers, if they do have to remove trees, which for us is a last resort, then that more are planted on the site as well. So we are getting that net gain, if at all possible. Although we will lose some ancient trees, some valuable mature trees, but we just need to mitigate against that as much as we possibly can.
Councillor Morgan, yeah. Stuart, I'd just like to ask one question, if I may. I don't wish to fully privatise tree planting, but is there anything we can do as a council to reach out to local businesses? I mean, it's not uncommon for businesses to sponsor roundabouts, for example. Is there anything we could do for businesses to sponsor a tree planting either outside their shop or in a local community area? That might be a way of easing some of the funding pressures.
So that's something we are looking at. We've obviously got marketing force now that are looking after our sponsored roundabouts. So we're in discussions with them about how we could do that for outside of businesses, but even for individuals to maybe sponsor a tree in front of their property and stuff like that. So yes, we are looking at those things. It's in its infancy, but yes, we would look to do that. And again, Trees for Cities are bringing in external funding to Hillingdon's funding from individuals. The tree planting that happened at Field End last year was a donation by an individual's family. So they're very good at accessing different routes to funding that wouldn't necessarily be available to Hillingdon, because these people wouldn't necessarily want to give their money to Hillingdon, but they will give it to Trees for Cities because it's a charitable that's suiting their objectives.
Thank you, Stuart. Could you also just clarify these stats that you give? I know a number of tree planting goes on at Breakspear Crematorium as part of the bereavement service. Are they included in these figures?
They're not included in these figures. Again, they're normally one-for-one like replacements. So Breakspear Crem's generally quite full up with trees. So the opportunities to plant new trees are limited, and it's more that when trees are being felled, then new memorial trees are planted.
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. And Councillor Kaufman, please.
Sorry, just a quick one, Chairman. Stuart, the suggestion of green walls between school play areas and roads, are we looking at these are we looking at these sort of metre-long hedges that are already sort of established, if you like? So you're just whacking in metre-long sort of sections of hedge, so you've almost got an instant hedge without having to sort of worry about putting sort of saplings in and them growing, etc. It's just an interest.
Yeah, we're looking at various different options. The instant hedges are very difficult to establish because once they've gone from the nursery in these wonderful planters, they go again into a very hostile environment. So trees do very, very well when they're planted small.
Right.
Because they survive more, they withstand the hostile environment they're going into, because they're young. So bigger trees, bigger hedges are more and more hard to establish, obviously more and more expensive to establish, and the ongoing maintenance of them is greater in those initial years. So you're watering them more often and things like that. So it's a cost benefit again. Yes, you get instant, but not necessarily straight away.
Thanks, Stu.
You get what I say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the questions that have been asked now, and we have other items to go through as well. So thank you very much for your attendance, Stuart, and giving your report this evening. Very much appreciated and very informative. Well done to you and your officers.
Thank you very much.
You're free to go whenever you wish to do so, Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Item 7 is our quarterly school places update, pages 21 to 26. Good evening to Dan and Sarah. Whenever you're ready, please give a brief overview of your presentation and we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is a very brief update on this report as well, because we haven't got as much new information as in the previous and in the by May and June, when we will have all the January census, which isn't yet ready, and we will have the national offer days total information and the next round afterwards, because we know secondary national offer day I'll cover, primary is coming up, but it's in the next few rounds after that when some parents decline the offers, new offers are made, new parents have come forward since that process closed. So it'll be in May that we'll have a good picture. But interestingly, in October, the census really did show that Hillingdon rolls were holding up very well. And although schools are experiencing uncertainty and they've had to work in a different way during the pandemic, it does seem that most of them are still very full on roll. And those that have any issues with their school place planning, we've identified, and different officers are working to support them. So one of the big things, of course, is the legislation on school planning encourages parents to apply for any school anywhere. And if they meet the criteria of that school, they get a place. And so it favours the parents perhaps more than the schools and rational planning. And also we are in a porous system here. that the places and the parents move around us and our neighbouring 6 local authorities, which makes it all much more unpredictable and keeps me young and excited by it. Very briefly, the big issue on secondary national offer day is that at the end of it, nearly all the schools are full. 15 of the 18 schools were utterly full on national offer day, and that was with 3 having extra places. So we only had 3 schools where there were places left, in Harefield, Hewens and Oakwood, which is perhaps more than, perhaps that was more pupils going into our schools than expected. It's slightly over the projections. And therefore, I've got work underway with the data performance team where we're reviewing our projections. We're reviewing a lot more about the cross-borough movement that's taken place this year and last, and also the impact of parent preferences, which then fill up some schools with pupils that you might not have expected. Obviously, we've got 3 faith schools. They always take pupils from a long, further distance. Most of our secondary pupils, I mean, over 80%, go to travel 2 miles to school. Indeed, for our most popular schools, most of the pupils at them are living just over a mile away. So but parents can choose schools and travel. I mean, I'm talking about secondary here, and primary is even tighter distances. So we only had 140 places left vacant in schools at the end of the process, including the extra ones we created. That's just 3.7%, which obviously is less than the 5% margin that the DfE recommends. And also in previous years, we've always had an increase from National Offer Day to the January roll following, which would be next January in this case, of about 100 pupils. So it is very tight for the year on secondary. But of course, we have developments in hand to add more permanent places. And I've also started looking at how we would manage 2022 roles, because we know that the year 5 year group at the moment in October had well over 100 more pupils than the year 6 coming up. So we've still got to get another 100 more in before the new schools are ready in 2022. Looking to primary applications, their national offer day isn't until April. The computer starts crunching all the applications at the end of this week. And what is interesting is we've had a slight rise, of 57 more first preferences for reception than last year. So it's very clear that every year of primary is still pretty stable. There's been some slight dips overall, but most of our primary schools are utterly full with classes of 30 throughout. And again, in terms of looking at those that need to reduce their PAN, we've narrowed it down to about 12 primary schools that are the subject of our inquiries at the moment and our discussions with those schools. And we'll be coming back to this committee, say in May, to really name them and explain what proposals are and what the outcome of, say, the National Offer Day and the January rolls are for those schools, because those are deciders on whether we can actually take action for them. Again, both for primary and secondary, Hillingdon had a far higher levels of applications for both primary and secondary than most other London boroughs. And also it had a rise in primary applications, which was quite unusual. Some of the other boroughs had as much as a 10% drop in the number of applications. And those are analyses, and also the extent of inter-borough changes of pupils moving in and out that we're looking at. And I'm just completing at the moment. And I can answer more questions on if you're interested. In terms of special provision, as I said, we've got quite a big review underway to double check the needs of pupils are being best met, and also that the large number of places that are being built, which will be all opened by 2024, that we've got clear plans as to which pupils go in them. Special place planning is far more demanding because there's a total place number for the school, and there are some entrants at age 5 and age 11, but new education healthcare plans are being issued almost every week, certainly about 10 or to 15 a month, and those pupils need to be placed throughout the year in every year group. So it's far more, even though the numbers are far lower than the 20 and 30,000 in primary and secondary, and with the management of admissions into the existing special schools and working out how we will best use the new places and whether we do indeed need more special school places in the short term, and we have some thoughts about that which we would be able to, we're still looking at. But for instance, I've given a table of all the special schools developments, and you'll see that we've got 52 new places, extra places being created when the Young People's Academy is rebuilt, and they'll be open next April. And of course we will move the current pupils will move into the school in each year group, and so we have a lot of choices to negotiate with that trust about what age of pupils we add in and how many we add in the first year or the first couple of months of opening, or how many we phase in to the second year before it's utterly full. So those are the kind of choices that I'm working through with planning. I'm working with Naveed's team on a new kind of projections model for special school planning, and also closely, of course, with Vikram's team. So that's the quick overview. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I invite questions. Councillor Sweeting.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think we must recognise that this has been quite a difficult report. I'm sorry, but my voice is being echoed. I don't know if anybody has got their
it was Sarah's mic was still on, so I've muted her.
All right, I'll start again. I think it's recognised that this has been quite a difficult report to write because it's only sort of halfway through, the admissions period. But I'd like to concentrate on two areas, if I may. One is secondary, and I find it rather worrying that we've got quite a few parents that are not accepting any place at all. Now, can we link that in any way to an area of the borough where this is happening, and to possibly the 6 secondary schools that we've got, which unfortunately, as far as Ofsted is concerned, are in need of improvement? So your report provides on page 22 the 505 to schools in other LAs, but also I believe that there's this 200 or so information I've just received that have not accepted any offer at all. And if I can then go to special, I might as well get my second question in whilst I'm here. It would be good to have an audit of all of our special schools, not only the ones that have been expanded, because it concerns me that we have schools such as the Willows that are taking double the number of children. And I don't believe there's been any information on any extension to the Willows. And the grave concern I've got on SEND children is that there seems to be some way that some schools are taking very many more SEND children than others? And is there any ways that we can allocate SEND children more evenly? Because at the moment they seem to be going to those schools, primary schools, that have got unfilled places. For example, there's one primary school that I believe is got almost 50% of its role as SEND children. So it's basically concerned about the secondary places and the number of pavement. And when it comes to specials, it would be good to have an audit of all of our specials and the places that they are offering, and the reasons why some schools are taking a lot more without additional accommodation. And then my concern about mainstream schools that are taking a huge number of SEND children, that will have an implication to budgets, school organisation, and for the non-SEND children that are in those schools.
Okay, I can answer some of those quite quickly. Yes, some parents all the time don't accept an offer. Parents have up to 6 preferences to make and then are very surprised if they get their 3rd or 4th, and sometimes their knee-jerk option is to say they don't want it. So that's why I'm saying there's quite a lot of movement goes on. I don't know where you got your figure of 200, but we would always expect about 250 declines from National Offer Day, and then some of them come back again, some of them take an offer in another school. That's why May, June is going to be critical. We've only got 4 secondary schools in RI, not 6, and it is true that the big issue for them is that they have far lower preferences from parents. And if you don't get preferences, you just don't get filled. And it is parents' choice that some of the schools are very oversubscribed, and therefore there's a very narrow distance that emerges in which you'd be definite get in. And it's also when we have the few who haven't been matched to any of their preferences, and the local authority then at the end of the admissions process matches them to one of the schools with places. Yes, most of them will be to those schools that are graded RI, and yes, that's where some of the parents do decline them. So that's the pattern. It's not a pattern of area of the borough, though obviously those difficult isolated areas of the borough, the awkward corners, sometimes parents find it difficult to get into a school from there, and some of the schools in those areas find it difficult to be filled. Yes, my special audit includes all 7 special schools that are in the borough at the moment, and the 2 being the 2 new ones we will get, and also the 13 SRPs and various options beyond that as well. As to Willow's taking double, I don't think they have. The other issue about the special schools is I have to run 2 lines on them, because the special schools have each got a total number of places of all pupils in all year groups. And then they also have a number of how many of those are Hillingdon residents. And I've been working hard with SEND over the last 2 years to increase their effectiveness of their processes so that we maximise the number of Hillingdon residents within the total. And I think what it is at Willow is at one stage Willow had less than half its pupils on roll were borough residents, and we were, but now so I think it's doubled the number of borough residents. It hasn't doubled its size in total, but I will double check that and put it in a note afterwards.
Just could I come back on the why I've got the 6 secondary schools? It's in the next report that we're getting, which has got the 6 special schools in need of, 6 secondary schools in need of improvement. So I'm trying to find the page, but it's
okay. Sorry,
it's in the following report that we're looking at as agenda item 8.
okay, but I was just clarifying it's the 4 that are graded RI by Ofsted are the 4 that have the lower number of applications and preferences from parents, significantly lower.
Yeah, but page 30 of the next report gives it as 6.
Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't read all the detail of the next report.
And also the audit of special schools doesn't include the Willows. I just wanted, you know, Hedgewood and Willows to be included in it all.
I was clarifying my review of needs and age groups covers all the schools. That table just covered those that are having new building works. I can
I realise that, but it would be good to have a full audit, please.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're doing that.
Thank you. I can see no other members wishing to ask questions, in which case we will move on to the next item on the reports, unless you have anything further to add, Sarah? No? Okay. Thank you. So we'll go on to item 8 now, which is the Standards and Quality in Education 2019 to 2020, pages 27 to 94. Dan, are you with us? I believe he is.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you.
Very ready.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to ask my colleague, Abby Preston, to take us through the report, and then we can invite questions from the committee. Abby, could you take us through? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm new to the role of Head of Education Improvement and Partnerships and joined the Borough in January. So I'll take you through just some quick summary points from the report because it's quite extensive, and I'm sure you've gone through it all already. So firstly, regarding data, as I'm sure you're probably aware, due to coronavirus, we have not had any statutory assessment for 2019 and 2020, and then this year as well, there won't be any statutory assessment available. So the data that we're basing this on is the data that you've seen previously from 2018 to 19. So I won't go into depth with that because I know that that's been looked at previously, but just to summarise, the early years phase is really successful across Hillingdon, and we have really positive attainment and progress showing. Within the primary phases, it's stable outcomes for key stages, so we're either in line with or above national level for all key measures. For the secondary phase, key stage 4 outcomes and progress have decreased slightly in that year, but still remain above national averages. And at post-16 level, progress has been made, but it does continue to underperform in this area. So this is going to continue to be a key priority for us moving forward. So looking at the Ofsted judgments, obviously due to COVID, the full framework was suspended and it's been monitoring visits for the majority of the year. But during 2018-19, there were 87% of schools judged as good or better, compared to 88% the year before. So it's roughly the same sort of percentage. During the pandemic, only 15 schools were inspected. Of these, 1 of 15 demonstrated an improvement to the final inspection judgments and moved from requires improvement to good, whilst 11 of the 15 retained their previous inspection judgments. 3 of the 15 schools during this period received a downgraded judgment, and of those, 2 of those were academy schools, which we're working closely with the Regional Schools Commissioner to support the improvement of. So for our schools at risk register, we have 19 schools that are at risk of underperformance in Hillingdon, which has increased by 1 from the previous year. Of this, 9 of the schools are maintained by the council and are already in receipt of intensive monitoring challenge and support by our officers. We, as I said, we work with the RSC to support across the borough and have regular calls with them to keep each other in the loop and support each other with the progress of these schools. We have slightly updated what we're doing as far as a team to support our schools. So we've introduced a new 4-tier categorisation and support model for our schools on behalf of the Education Improvement Team. So we now have the 4 categories. Originally we had intensive, targeted and self-improving. We've now introduced a new category called the watch category, which is a form of light touch support for schools with just one area of need rather than a number of areas of need for support. We've also updated some of our templates we use and introduced a new support plan for schools in these categories so that we can be really clear about the objectives we're looking to achieve by working with those schools. And our education advisors are looking at producing impact reports as well now to really keep our team focused on everything that they're doing being about what impact that they're having. So a lot of the work our team's been focusing on has been around supporting schools through lockdown and the challenges that COVID has brought, which I'm sure you're aware, nationally has been a massive challenge for schools, and they've done really well in responding to any kind of guidance that comes out, often at fairly short notice because of the circumstances. And they've done really well across Hillingdon in responding to this. So our officers have supported schools intensively, and there's been a key focus on supporting with remote learning policies, ensuring that our disadvantaged children have devices and can access remote learning, the support with testing, which was extensive for secondary schools in particular. And then our officers have been supporting with children returning back to the school and now focusing on catch-up funding and how we're going to make sure that our schools are doing everything they can to help close those gaps for the children across the borough. So I think at that point, I'm going to stop and ask if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Abby. If I could just ask you to mute yourself, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd invite members from questions. I have our first member, Councillor Sweeten.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm getting, so okay, it's not happening now, so it's fine. It's a complex report, and we thank officers very much for it, and especially the schools that have worked so hard during and against the background of COVID, which has unfortunately highlighted some of the widening gaps. However, I would take us back to the very last meeting we had before we locked down last year. If we look at the minutes of that meeting of the 19th of March, we asked for a number of things to make scrutiny of the report easier, because as we all know, it's a very, very weighty one. In the past, we had 2 reports. We had reports that detailed just the results of our schools' key stages, and then we had a report on school improvements and performance. And I would suggest that we consider breaking those into 2 reports in future, because I think we've all waded through this very detailed report, and there's so much to it. Secondly, we asked for always comparisons with statistical neighbours. Other London boroughs should be brought together more clearly in tablet table form, and not scattered throughout the report as we've got here. And we also wanted it to be acknowledged that Ofsted doesn't say that national comparisons are important. They use statistical neighbours and London boroughs, and we're not using that. There's quite a few when we just measure ourselves against national figures. And thirdly, we asked for the performance, in particular primaries, to be via the 14 education planning areas, and in this way we can see where there is more need for intervention in certain parts of the borough. And lastly, we asked how we can in Hillingdon learn from the neighbouring London boroughs who have higher levels of deprivation but produce far better results. For example, Newnham Secondary, with 50% deprivation, has got more kids into Oxford and Cambridge than Eton. The final comment is that COVID has highlighted the challenge which some children experience, which is a bar to learning. And therefore, I would ask that next year's report needs to concentrate on the work being done to improve results. But particularly, I think we do need to have these 2 separate reports. And I would say about the Ofsted inspections, we have actually now gone down from 91.3% in 2017-18 to now 87%. So we are dipping in respect to the percentage of our schools that are excellent and good.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting. I don't have those minutes in front of me from that meeting, but I do recall it being mentioned. I don't know if Dan was you there at the time. I think that was agreed to look into. But do you wish to comment on that?
Thank you, Chairman. We can certainly provide that information. I think as Abby set out, the challenge this year is that we haven't had the usual assessments in the usual way, and we've had a paucity of information really. But I think I do take on board the point that Councillor Sweeting's made, that certainly looking forward, as the information starts to flow in again about assessments and information by school, in particular the focus on any sort of gaps that may be exacerbated by the changes to learning and the impact on learning for young people, we can certainly include that. The information is all available in terms of working papers, but in the way that Councillor Sweeting's described, and if it would be helpful, we can provide that to committee members in that format.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeting, was there anything else you wish to follow up on before I move to the next member?
Well, we did last time put a report from this particular item to the Cabinet, and I was wondering whether we could put something similar this time. Maybe the committee thanks the schools and officers in supporting children's learning and well-being through pandemic. However, there continued to be concerns around school performance, which put us below the London average, and ask again that Hillingdon looks at best practice delivered by other councils and have higher levels of deprivation, so that our position compared to other London boroughs and statistical neighbours can be improved. Now, we did put a report to Cabinet last time, which asked for something similar, but you will be able to see that when you look back at the minutes of that meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting. Happy to do that again on this occasion, unless other members feel it's unnecessary. I can't see any indications disputing that, so yes, happy to do that. And Neil, if you could look into typing something up for us and liaising between myself and the Labour lead outside of the meeting, I'll read the word in. Thank you very much. Mr. Little.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask two questions, if I may. One about the early years and one about liaison with the regional commissioners with schools requiring support. But before doing so, I would like to echo Councillor Sweeting's point about the complexity of this particular report. We're approaching it at 9:10, and it's a 70-page report, I think. We can't do proper justice to it for getting all this data in this form. It would be much better if it could be broken down into chunks for that reason. Firstly, my question on the early years foundation stage: do we get data for those stages about the ethnicity and the gender of the pupils, and do they show up any gaps similar to the sort of gaps we see at the primary and secondary level? And my second question related to the liaison with the regional schools commissioners, to ask how quickly they respond when something's drawn to their attention, and do they offer similar levels of support to the schools that we offer to our schools?
Abby, are you happy to sort of jump in and answer that one?
Yes. So the data for early years, I need to double check, so I'll come back on that point, but I believe we should get the data on different ethnic groups that we should be able to analyse and look at gaps. And just to follow up on that point, one thing I would say is that it's a real priority for us moving forward, dealing with sort of improving schools, but through looking at our disadvantaged groups and how we can close those gaps, because I think through COVID it's also highlighted different groups of children that are now sort of falling behind than just the children that were already having gaps in outcomes. So that's a real priority for us, is looking at disadvantaged groups and how we can support effectively and improve those outcomes. Regarding the RSC, we have regular contact with them. We have weekly calls with them at the moment, and they have been very responsive to supporting as far as getting information and looking into different matters for us. The way that they deal with schools and school improvement is slightly different, and I don't know that it's comparable to the way that we deal with it as council officers as to the time that we allocate. I think it's dealt with more on a sort of dealing with the head of the trust rather than looking at individual schools per se, but they do follow up concerns and they do act proactively. And I think the relationship that we have with them is very strong, and that's supportive to both our academies and maintained schools. So I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you. Naveed, do you indicate you wish to come in on that to answer as well?
Yes, Chair. Just to say that we do get that information. I'm just confirming Abby's point regarding the ethnicity and the background of our early years pupils, and we can do that analysis in terms of any particular gaps and bring that to the committee if that's of interest.
My concern would be that the gaps do start early, and that it's worthwhile seeing the result of that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mavis.
Thank you, Chair. And Abby, welcome to your role. I do want to share the disappointment in this isn't directed at Abby at all, in the comparisons. It's really distracting and unhelpful to have national comparison. It doesn't add any value to what we're trying to look at. Statistical and other London boroughs is much more helpful. And it just to prove the point, as we read through, we just see, and I'm really concerned that in Key Stage 1, reading attainment, we're 7th out of 11 on our statistical neighbours, so those who are most similar to ourselves. Writing, 7th out of 11. Key Stage 2, it's our reading and writing, again in the lower ranks. And when we can see what areas are doing that are very similar to our own, and we can really compare and grind down into the detail of what we need to be doing. I suppose my questions are we appropriately resourced to help schools? Bearing in mind, I understand the challenges with academisation. It makes it extremely difficult sometimes for local authorities, and I know that the team has been working very, very hard. Departments are working hard to make sure that we provide all the resources to academies. But are we appropriately resourced to really start moving Hillingdon up the table? Because in terms of statistical neighbours and in London, we are still a long way behind. There has been improvement. I'm not taking away from that, and I applaud officers for doing that. But we need a leapfrog into being much higher, much higher. And I also want to ask, in other areas of the council, is there an impact such as the education, health and care plans? The lag in that system, which I see through individual bits of casework that we do as ward councillors, the lag there seems to have a significant impact on our ability to appropriately place children, as we looked at with our last school places, but also to get them the support quickly. And a lot of schools are spending a lot of time and energy without properly assessed provision for those with additional needs, because the plans are delayed. And I know there's a constant backlog, and I know that the pandemic won't have helped this, but I really would just like to ask, what can we do to leapfrog? What can we do, not to shortcut, but to really pile in the resources to ensure that we have all the support that our schools, staff and leaderships need to just make a difference to improve the attainment and the progress of learning in Hillingdon.
Just in response to those points, thank you. In terms of resources, I mean, in Hillingdon, we're known as as a sort of what's known as a high delegating sort of borough or authority, which means in funding terms, most of the money goes directly to schools, rather than there being a sort of central pot for managed by schools for school improvement. And what that means is that there are opportunities, therefore, for schools to work collaboratively, to pool their resources, and to work together on sort of cross-cutting issues which are only sometimes best solved by schools working together, as well as obviously schools using their funding to drive up improvement. And there's lots of evidence in the borough of schools working effectively. But that said, we do recognise as well that there are some parts of the some schools, some parts of the borough where there is evidence, having looked at historical attainment results and progress results, that there is a need for some closing of the gaps, as it would be the case for all boroughs. So with that in mind, one of the things that that schools working with us are leading on is a review of what we can do differently through a partnership review, and so we're actually bringing in an independent sort of view, really, to see what things we can do differently, and we want to draw on what other boroughs are doing. We want to find ways to unlock, really, and break through some ceilings where there is evidence that other boroughs have been able to do that. And it will require a different way of working, and it will require some, I'm sure at times some fairly uncomfortable conversations. But I am confident that that schools have actually got the drive to make this happen, and I see some very effective practice on the grounds. But what we need to be able to do is to harness that, to make sure that the practice is shared, and it's available to all schools. So we are looking at a different way of achieving even better results than we've achieved over the last 5 years, building on what we've achieved, and finding a way to do that. And I'm certainly with Abby New coming into post, there's real support and collaborative working across schools and with the local authority to help find a solution. And I am pleased to say that the vast majority of schools have bought into the review and the commitment to find different ways of working collaboratively across schools and the local authority to raise standards. Coming to the point about SEND, or specifically HCP's education healthcare plans. Now Vikram Hansrani, who's the lead on in this area, unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. But what I do know is that there's been a step change over the last 12 months to effectively, in everyday speak, catch up with ensuring assessments are on time. And this year there was a record number of assessments which were completed to timetable, which has meant that the clarity about the needs and the support packages and the appropriate placements has been achieved this year. And there will obviously be new applications in the school year, and there will also be changing needs which need to be discussed with and reviewed with schools through the review process, and also with parents and the child. But I think I think what that has meant though is that there's been greater clarity about needs, and as Sarah spoke earlier, we've also got greater clarity as well about I suppose forecasting and what that is looking like going forward.
Thank you. Abby, I see your hand's also been raised. Would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Dan was saying, in that we're in a position where our team now is a permanent team, which is a really positive step forward. And in that, our sort of relationships that we build with schools and the work that we can do with them will only improve over time. But one of the things that we've been actively doing is reaching out to other boroughs, other statistical neighbours, and building links with them and talking to them and sort of finding out different ways of working. And we are looking at research of how different boroughs do improve outcomes, and research overall to support what we do as a team. So there's lots of work going on in the background, and I'm sure we're going to see the positive outcomes of that over time.
Thank you very much, Abby. Councillor Mavis, do you wish to have a supplementary?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you. That seems like a different tone to what I've heard before. I like that. I mean, all of this critique comes in a friendly manner. It comes with a desire just to see the best for our children and young people in the borough. You know, having been a student here, not student, well, a pupil, I suppose you call it when you're young, and grown up here, just wanting to see all of the generations have the best education we could possibly provide. And I'm sure there's, complete support across, all of the councillors for that. So to the idea that there is an openness, as I'm sure there has been, but a complete kind of we'll try anything to differently, if we have to rethink how we do things, that's really, really encouraging. And I'm not saying that that's, baby out of the bathwater. I know there's some great progress being made. I suppose it's a passionate plea to just keep driving to find what we can from other neighbours. I just wanted to focus for a moment, if we could, on those not in employment, education and training. Now, historically, before the participation age was raised, this level would have been a lot higher. It would have been 10% or whatever, would have been 8 or 9% of young people. And now it's currently around 2%. I really don't want this cohort, a bit like care leavers, to be not overlooked, but, to not keep that critical friend there. And I do continue to see, and I know that last time we discussed this, there's looks movement to change how things were done. But the best way to analyse this is by adding the not known figure to the neat figure, and that gives you the overall. And the reason for that is if they're not known, they're most likely, they're not on a roll for sure, but they're most likely to be neat, or if they're in the borough at all sometimes. But it's that kind of, we're looking at in Hillingdon at like a 4.2% compared to the region's 2.8%. Yes, this is a small cohort, but it is really, really important. And I raise it just because I see that now there are recommendations on establishing a neat team and, and working a lot more closely in dedicated tracking and joint working, which I applaud. But I am just surprised we didn't have that in the first place. And so I suppose the question is, that's brilliant and fantastic. But are there other areas for smaller cohorts where we need to maybe recreate teams? Because the neat teams would have existed when Connections was around 20 years ago, all that sort of stuff. But are there other smaller cohorts? So like those who have schooling at home, I'm not using the right phrases because it's 9 o'clock, those who are care leavers, etc., where we just need to recreate some of the things that really tracked and helped and targeted, even if it is just a temporary period, just to get the support for those more marginalised and at-risk cohorts. I hope that makes sense.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. I mean, what we, I suppose it's, the sort of candid response is that we do keep under review the services and the needs. And you're absolutely right. At times, we do need to create a dedicated resource to give a particular issue the focus and the sort of, and I suppose the dedicated attention that an issue needs to bring about a step change in improvement or accelerate a step change in improvement. And I think we're certainly open to that. And I think it's probably fair to say that we will keep under review the needs of children, the learning and education needs of children in the borough, and particularly in the context of the last 12 months, so that we are flexible and responsive to needs, particularly as I suppose a greater understanding about the impacts of the pandemic starts to become apparent and a lot clearer through ongoing assessment of pupils. So thank you for the comments. I think we will certainly take that on board and apply the model where we think it will really deliver a change.
Thank you very much. There are no other members indicating they wish to ask questions. So as it's getting late, we'll now move on and finish the meeting. But thank you very much to Abby and Dan and Sarah for your reports this evening. Very much appreciated. And we'll now move on to our next item. Thank you very much. Item 9 is our Cabinet Forward Plan, pages 95 to 100. Are there any comments or questions? If not, can we take them as noted? Councillor Mavis?
Just to echo my comment from earlier about the climate change action plan, as it was mentioned, other committees are putting it on the on the agenda. So linking this to the next one. It's my opinion that we should have it on our agenda anyway. However, as corporate services has taken the lead, can I just ask that if approved by Cabinet, that we put this as part of our ongoing work plan? And just to say that I think discussing consultation on an area as important as climate change should really have come to POCs beforehand, so that the process of consultation, which is as important in getting all those views as the action plan itself, it would have added a real strength to the choices the Cabinet need to make.
Thank you very much. Dan, I saw your hand go up. Was that in relation to Councillor Mayers, or was it something separate?
My apologies, Chairman. It's the next item. I just wanted to raise a point.
Okay, no
Coming a little bit early.
Thank you.
Yeah. Chairman, if I may, regarding that, that obviously the suggestion from Councillor Mayers there is that if approved, an information item report or some other report come to this committee on the subject of climate change. Happy to add that if indeed the committee as a whole agree it.
Committee seems to be indicating yes, so yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Would there be no other comments? That's noted. We move on to our last item, which is the work programme, pages 101 to 104. Dan, do you wish to say something?
Yeah, I know the youth services is on the on the sort of work programme. I believe it's on for next month, and I just wanted to sort of let the committee know that we're actually undertaking a review of youth services currently, and it would be really a little too early to bring forward a paper on youth services before that review had completed, because I would want the committee to have that full report when it was available.
Any points other members wish to raise? Councillor Mavis.
Yeah, I'd like to provide some context if I may. So the current universal youth service is what we've looked at in the past, and where the question's been raised. I did want this to be part of a review before a review was done in itself. I mean, it's my opinion, and I know I'm quite passionate and repetitive about this, that the universal youth service is something we want to complement other services, but not necessarily dissolve into other services. And my fear is that this service that's universal could become more targeted through this current review. So it would be useful to take stock, and I know that's extremely difficult during a pandemic because last year's figures will be way anywhere else, but to just take stock as to where are we now. And then I suppose when the review happens and the changes are made, because they probably will be, we at least then have a benchmark to say where they were and where they are and if there's been a difference. Because it's genuinely for me about universal youth offer and beyond Fiesta and what the plans are for that. And I know you're reviewing that, but it's where we've been so far. You know, what are the trends we've seen? And I'm just very aware that the time is not great, but I'd like this to come back a couple of times because it's a small service in the council, but it's an extremely vital one for our young people.
Dan, did you wish to say anything further on that talk?
It's difficult to sort of comment really, because obviously we haven't completed the review. So to comment would almost be to predict what the outcome would be. But I suppose what I would like to reassure committee of is that and once it's been through sort of the usual sort of processes and a presentation of a report to the cabinet member, then I'm sure the cabinet member would consider a report coming to POC, and from my conversations with members is that there remains that commitment to youth services, and this is about sort of I suppose reviewing what the future shape of youth services should be in the context of the changing requirements and needs of young people in our borough.
Neil.
Yeah, thanks. I don't want to preempt any further comments, but I presume that the committee is happy then to defer that item until such time as is more appropriate to bring back, or Councillor Mayers is shaking his head there.
I'm happy to defer it for the time being. I don't want officers to keep coming back and forth. It'll be ready when it's ready, and as and when that is ready, I think it's then appropriate for the officers to come before the committee to give their presentations that accordingly.
I mean, if there is dissenting opinions, we can always put it to a vote.
If the Labour Party wish to have a vote, I'm happy to have a vote. If not, I will take it as they agree that we were happy to defer it. I'll wait for an indication from a member of the Labour group. Councillor Mavis.
I mean, Jan is the lead, so she can correct me if I wish, but I think it would be worth noting our objection to the deferral. I mean, we know what a vote leads to, so we're just yeah, I just note our objection because this was already deferred from earlier in the year.
Councillor Sweeting.
And I also say that this issue has been going to be reviewed for a number of years. There was supposed to be a review after the Children's Centre review, directly after that. So we are talking of years, and we have really been waiting for something on this. And our concerns are that it's all going to be sewn up before we really need to look at the Universal Youth Office, because we know that the budget has been reduced so much, and we don't want it just to sort of disappear.
Thank you to you both. Would you like a vote, or sorry, Neil, before?
No, sorry, go ahead, Jim, just clarify whether there's a vote and then I'll comment.
Okay, I'll go to you, Councillor Sweeting, as the Labour lead. Would you like a vote?
No, we don't need a vote. We just need to have it recognised that we are very disappointed that we're not having the review as an information item, because this has been long overdue.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sweeting. Neil?
Yeah, thank you, then. In that case, then I presume the committee is happy for me to liaise with Dan outside the meeting to arrange when it might be cut back on the work programme.
Yeah, indeed. Councillor Morgan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, okay, yes, I can see the point in deferring this, but if we have something set in stone that says, okay, this must come to us by, I don't know, the 8th of June, 22nd of July, whatever date it must be, that gives the officers a chance to do something and to have it ready for us for that date. No deferment, nothing. That's the date that they've got to come to.
Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to preempt the review again, but I don't know whether Dan could comment on when it might be likely to come back at this time, or if it's just too early.
Through the chairman and through Neil, I mean, what I can do is to offline confirm a date when it can be programmed to return to the committee.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Just a suggestion for myself as well on information items. I would, if I assume it's in the remit of this POC, to actually look at the issue of abandoned vehicles, which seems to be a growing concern, particularly in my ward, and I believe other members' wards as well. Primarily in how we deal with the relationship between ourselves, the DFT, the police. How's that joined up thinking going about? But an information item would be a good start, assuming we can fit it into our programme. If we can't, then I'm happy to delay it to maybe another year, but certainly in the near future, it'd be good, something to look at, I feel, if the committee's minded to agree with that. Councillor Morgan, your hand's up again. Sorry, I've not lowered it from the last time, that's why, sorry. Okay.
No, I'll put it up because I'd like something else that perhaps we could have a look at. We had a great report from the tree services, the green spaces this evening. However, it's carrying on from the green and the trees, where we're having companies going in and just completely wiping out wooded areas throughout the borough. Without comeback or recourse from us or the landowners. So I'm just wondering if we could have something to come forward on that, please.
Councillor Morgan, are you specifically referring to TPOs in particular, or just trees in general?
No, just trees in general. I think it was a large area in one of the wards just south of the A40 where literally they've gone in and wiped out 200 odd trees. So, you know, I'm just wondering if that's something that we should be looking into.
Neil, you had your hand raised, sorry.
I did, Chairman, thank you. Yeah, just Councillor Morgan, to clarify, are you talking about illegal felling of trees or trees that, okay, so it's illegal felling of trees.
Illegal felling of trees.
And perhaps I could liaise with Councillor Morgan outside the meeting to pick his brains on some of the particular examples that he might know of, and then I can put that to the relevant officers and see whether it's suitable for an information item.
I think that'd be appropriate, Neil. So it's one thing to cut down trees on private land, but if they're not protected, then, you know, it's more the TPOs and that I think would be interesting. But it's up to Councillor Morgan, whatever he suggests, and we can look at it. Any other points at all before we close? Nope. Okay. Thank you all very much for your attendance, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes our business for this evening. Stay safe, and I'll see you all soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.